The candles in the great hall had burned down to their final inches, pooling wax like frozen tears upon the ancient iron holders. Valdric Ashenvale stood at the window of his manor, watching the fog crawl across the valley below, as it had for 600 years. The glass was old, hand-blown in a century, when craftsmen still whispered prayers into their work, and through its imperfect surface, the world outside seemed to ripple like water disturbed by a stone. He had not moved in hours. Time meant little to one who had outlived empires, but tonight it pressed against him with unusual weight. The anniversary had come again, as it did every autumn when the leaves turned the color of old blood, the anniversary of her death. Elara, his queen, his betrayer. The manor house groaned around him, its bones settling into the earth as all old things must. Once, these halls had rung with voices, with the laughter of servants and the whispered conspiracies of courtiers who sought his favor. Now, only silence lived here, thick as dust, heavy as regret. Valdric turned from the window. His reflection did not follow in the glass. It never had, not since the night 3 centuries past, when a dying king had cursed him with eternal hunger and eternal solitude. He had learned to live without mirrors, without the comfort of seeing his own face age and change and soften. He remained as he had been at 32, sharp-featured, pale as marble, with eyes the color of winter storms. The study awaited him, as it always did. Books lined every wall, thousands of volumes accumulated across lifetimes. Philosophy and poetry, history and heresy, the accumulated wisdom of a species he no longer belonged to. He ran his fingers across their spines as he passed, feeling the leather crack and yield beneath his touch. So fragile, these repositories of human thought, so easily destroyed, like children. He closed his eyes against the memory, but it came regardless. 2 cribs in the nursery, 2 infants wrapped in silk, 2 futures that had diverged in ways he had not understood until it was far too late. Marcus, his heir, dark-haired and silent, even as a babe, and the other child, the foundling Elara had insisted they take in, a girl with eyes like forest pools, who had been left on the steps of a village church with nothing but a blanket and a locket bearing no name. They had raised them as siblings. Marcus had grown cold and distant, inheriting his father's immortality when he came of age, vanishing into the eastern lands to build his own kingdom of shadow. The girl, Seraphine, they had called her, had remained human, had aged, had died in the plague that swept through the countryside 2 centuries past. Or so he had believed. Valdric poured himself a glass of wine from a bottle that had been old when Napoleon marched across Europe. He did not need sustenance of this kind, but the ritual comforted him. The familiar motions of uncorking, pouring, lifting the glass to lips that could no longer taste as mortals tasted. Memory was the only flavor left to him, and tonight his memories were bitter. He had loved Elara once. Perhaps he still did, in the way one loves a wound that never fully heals. She had been magnificent in her cruelty, beautiful in her deceptions. A vampire queen who had manipulated courts and kingdoms, who had whispered in the ears of emperors and watched civilizations crumble for her amusement. He had thought her ambition matched his own. He had been wrong. She had died by his hand in the end. A mercy, she had called it, as the silver burned through her heart. A mercy for sins she would not name, for secrets she would not confess. He had held her as she turned to ash, had scattered her remains across the sea she had loved, had returned to this empty manor to wait for an end that would never come. The fire in the hearth had burned down to embers. Valdric did not bother to tend it. Cold did not touch him, not anymore. Nothing touched him. He existed in a bubble of eternal stillness, watching the world turn without him, waiting for a purpose that had long since crumbled to dust. Outside, an owl called across the darkness. Somewhere in the village at the base of the mountain, lights flickered in cottage windows, mortals going about their brief, brilliant lives, unaware that a monster watched them from the shadows above. He envied them their ignorance. He envied them their endings. The clock on the mantel struck midnight. Another day begun. Another day to endure. Valdric settled into the chair by the dead fire and closed his eyes. Sleep would not come. It never did. But the darkness behind his eyelids was peaceful in its way. In the darkness, he could pretend that the centuries had never happened, that he was still a mortal man with a mortal heart, capable of hope, capable of change, capable of being surprised. The knock at the door shattered his reverie like a stone through glass. He had not heard footsteps on the drive, had not sensed any presence approaching through the fog. His eyes snapped open, ancient instincts surging to life after decades of dormancy. No one came to the manor. No one had come for 50 years. Yet the knock came again, insistent, desperate, the sound of knuckles striking wood with the urgency of someone who had nowhere else to turn. Valdric rose from his chair. His movements were fluid, silent, predatory despite himself. 600 years of caution could not be easily set aside. He crossed the great hall in heartbeats, his hand closing around the iron handle of the main door. When he opened it, a young woman stood on the threshold, drenched in rain he had not noticed falling, her dark hair plastered to her face, her eyes were the color of forest pools. "I know what you are," she said, her voice trembling but unafraid. "And I know what she did. I have proof." She held up a locket, tarnished with age, its chain broken as though it had been torn from around a neck. The same locket. The very same. Valdric felt something crack inside his chest, something he had thought long dead, long buried beneath centuries of carefully cultivated numbness. "Who are you?" he asked, though some part of him already knew, some part of him had always known. "My name is Elena Ashwood," the woman said, "and I believe I am your daughter." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and inevitable. Valdric stared at her, at the shape of her jaw, the arch of her brow, the way she held herself with a dignity that seemed borrowed from another age. She was mortal, clearly, young enough to be measured in mere decades. But those eyes— "Come inside," he heard himself say, "before the cold takes you." She hesitated at the threshold, and he understood. Stepping into a vampire's home uninvited was one thing. Stepping in after an invitation was quite another. But her chin lifted, and she crossed the boundary with the courage of someone who had already decided that some truths were worth dying for. The great hall swallowed her small form. She looked around at the faded tapestries, the suits of armor standing sentinel in their alcoves, the shadows that pooled in corners the candlelight could not reach. If she was frightened, she did not show it. "You're younger than I expected," she said. "I am older than this house," Valdric replied. "Older than the village where you presumably came from. Older than the language we are speaking in its current form." "I know." She turned to face him, the locket still clutched in her hand. "I've spent 5 years researching you. The vampire lord of Ashenvale, they call you in the old texts. The deathless king, the shadow of the mountain. Colorful names. Mortals have always had a gift for melodrama. And vampires have always had a gift for deflection." Her voice sharpened. "I didn't come here for banter. I came because I found something. Something that changes everything about who I am. About who my family is." She reached into the satchel at her side and withdrew a leather journal, its pages yellow with age, its binding cracked and fragile. Valdric recognized the handwriting on the cover immediately, the flowing script, the elegant loops of the letters. Ilara's hand. "Where did you get that?" His voice came out harder than he intended, edged with an emotion he could not name. "My grandmother left it to me when she died. I never knew what it was. She kept it locked away, never spoke of it. But last year, I finally managed to open it." Elena's eyes met his, unflinching. "It's a confession, your wife's confession, written in the final months before her death." The fire in the hearth sparked back to life, of its own accord, flames leaping from the dead embers as though summoned by the intensity of the moment. Elena startled, but did not retreat. Valdric barely noticed. His attention was fixed on the journal, on the secrets it might contain, on the possibility that everything he had believed for 200 years might have been a lie. "Read it to me," he said quietly. "From the beginning." Elena opened the journal to the first page. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady, but her hands trembled slightly against the ancient paper. "I write this confession, knowing I will soon meet my end," she read. "Valdric suspects, though he does not yet have proof. He has always been too noble to act on suspicion alone. It is both his greatest strength and his most exploitable weakness. But the truth cannot remain buried forever. The truth never does." She paused, glancing up at him. He gestured for her to continue. When the children were born, I faced a choice that would shape the course of history. My son, my true son, was weak, sickly, unlikely to survive his first winter. The foundling girl we had taken in was strong, healthy, bearing all the marks of the ancient bloodline I had sought to continue. I did what any mother would do. I switched them. The words fell into the silence like stones into still water. Valdric felt the ripples spread through him, disturbing sediment he had thought long settled. Marcus, he whispered. Marcus was the foundling, Elena finished. The child you raised as your heir, the vampire who now rules the eastern territories. He was never your son. He was never even human-born. According to this journal, he was a changeling, left by the Fae in exchange for a mortal child they had stolen. She turned another page, her voice growing stronger as she read. Seraphine was our true daughter, mine and Valdric's. She carried his immortal blood, diluted by my humanity, but present nonetheless. Had she been allowed to claim her birthright, she would have lived for centuries. Instead, I condemned her to mortality by denying her the truth of her heritage. I let her believe she was human. I let her age. I let her die. Valdric's hands clenched at his sides. The flames in the hearth roared higher, responding to his turmoil, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Why? The word tore from his throat like a wound. Why would she do this? Elena looked at him with those ancient eyes. Seraphine's eyes, he realized now. His daughter's eyes, passed down through generations to this woman standing before him. Power, she said simply. Control. According to the journal, she feared what you would become if you had a true heir. She feared being supplanted, overshadowed, forgotten. So she gave you a false son who would always be alien to you, always distant, while she kept your real bloodline hidden, where she could manipulate it as she chose. The centuries pressed down upon Valdric like physical weight. All those years of wondering why Marcus felt so wrong to him, why the bond between father and son had never formed despite his desperate efforts. All those years of grieving Seraphine, the foundling girl who had seemed more his child than his actual heir ever had. The truth had been there all along, buried in Alara's poisoned secrets, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to dig it up. The plague, he said, his voice hoarse. Seraphine died in the plague. No, Elena shook her head. She survived. Alara's journal says she arranged to have Seraphine secreted away, given to a distant branch of her own family to raise as their own. Seraphine lived to old age. She had children. Those children had children. She touched her chest, where the locket hung. I am her great-great-great-granddaughter, your descendant, your blood. Valdric stared at her. 600 years of existence, and he had never felt more like the world had shifted beneath his feet. A daughter, living in the village at the base of his mountain. A bloodline he had thought extinct, thriving in secret for 2 centuries. A truth that rewrote everything he had believed about his own history. Why come to me? He asked at last. You could have lived your whole life without ever knowing this, without ever speaking to a monster. Elena's chin lifted again, that stubborn dignity that seemed so familiar now that he knew where it came from. Because I'm dying, she said quietly. The doctors don't know what's wrong. They call it a wasting sickness, something in my blood that they can't identify or treat. But I've read enough of this journal to know what it really is. She met his eyes squarely. The immortal blood wants to wake up. It's been sleeping in my family for generations, but it's stronger in me than it was in any of my ancestors. If I don't find a way to help it complete the transformation, it will tear me apart from the inside. The silence that followed was profound. Valdric watched the firelight play across her pale face, saw the shadows under her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands that spoke of exhaustion, held at bay by sheer will. You came here to ask me to turn you, he said. I came here to ask you to save your daughter's legacy. Her voice broke slightly, then steadied. I have a son. He's only 7. If I die, he'll have no one. But if the stories are true, if the blood of the original vampire can awaken the dormant heritage in his descendants, then you could live. Valdric finished the thought she could not bring herself to complete. You could watch him grow. You could be there for him in ways Seraphine never could be for her children. Yes. The word was barely a whisper, but it echoed through the great hall like a cathedral bell. Valdric closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the choice she was offering him. To grant her immortality would be to condemn her to the same endless existence he had endured, the loneliness, the hunger, the slow erosion of everything that made life worth living. But to refuse would be to let his daughter's bloodline die, to abandon the last living piece of the family he had thought forever lost. "There is more to the journal," Elena said, her voice pulling him back from his thoughts. "Alara wrote about another consequence of her deception, something that makes this even more urgent." She turned to a page near the end, her expression growing troubled. "Marcus knows," she read. "He has always known, on some level, that he does not belong. The fey blood in his veins calls to him, whispers truths I tried so hard to bury. He searches for answers, and I fear what he will do when he finds them. He has his birth mother's cruelty without any of the restraint I tried to teach him. If he discovers the existence of Valdric's true heir..." She did not need to finish. Valdric understood the implication perfectly. "He will hunt them," he said grimly. "Every descendant of Seraphine, every carrier of my blood. He will see them as a threat to his claim, and he will destroy them. According to the journal, he's already started." Elena's voice was tight with controlled fear. "She wrote this entry 2 centuries ago, but the pattern is clear. Unexplained deaths in my family, generation after generation, accidents that weren't accidents, illnesses that came on too suddenly, too severely. I think he's been culling us, slowly, carefully, making sure no one survives long enough to threaten his position." The flames in the hearth turned blue-white with the force of Valdric's rage. 200 years. 200 years of his son. No, not his son. The changeling who had stolen his son's place, murdering his descendants one by one, and he had never known, had never suspected. "Where is Marcus now?" he asked, his voice soft and terrible. "I don't know, but I think he knows where I am." Elena reached into her satchel again and withdrew a folded piece of paper. "This was nailed to my door 3 nights ago." Valdric took the paper from her trembling hand. The handwriting was elegant, precise, the penmanship of someone who had learned to write in an age when script was an art form. "Blood calls to blood," he read aloud. "The false claims of dying heirs cannot supersede the rights of the firstborn. Withdraw your pretensions, or face the consequences that have befallen all who came before you." He looked up to find Elena watching him, her face pale but determined. "I didn't come here just to ask for immortality," she admitted. "I came here because you're the only one who can stop him. The journal says that only the blood of the original vampire, your blood freely given, can undo what Alara did. It can break the bond between Marcus and the power he stole. It can reveal him for what he truly is." "A changeling," Valdric murmured, "a child of the Fae, wearing my name and my legacy like a stolen coat." "Yes." Elena stepped closer, her eyes blazing with desperate hope. "I know I'm asking for the impossible. I'm asking you to confront someone you raised as your son for 3 centuries. I'm asking you to tear apart everything you thought you knew about your own family. But I have a child who needs his mother, and somewhere out there, your real descendants are dying because of a lie that was never their fault." The weight of her words settled into Valdric's ancient bones. He thought of Marcus. Cold, distant Marcus, who had never laughed, never wept, never shown any of the warmth that should have bound father to son. He thought of Seraphine, bright, curious Seraphine, who had loved books and gardens and the way morning light turned fog to gold. He had grieved the wrong child for 200 years. He had protected the wrong heir. "The transformation," he said slowly. "It is not a gift to be given lightly. It carries a cost that cannot be measured in years or blood. I know. You will watch everyone you love grow old and die. You will carry their memories like stones in your heart, and each one will make the burden heavier. I know. You will hunger for things that will horrify the person you used to be. You will walk between worlds, belonging fully to neither." Elena reached out and took his cold hand in her warm one. The touch was electric, alive in a way he had almost forgotten existed. "My great-great-great-grandmother died believing she was nothing special," she said softly. "She never knew she was the daughter of a king, never knew she had the potential for eternity running through her veins. Alara stole that from her. She stole it from all of us. Her grip tightened. I don't want immortality for its own sake. I want justice. I want my son to grow up knowing where he comes from. I want the truth, all of it, no matter how terrible, out in the open where it can finally stop hurting people. Valdric looked at her, this fierce, fragile woman who had walked into a monster's lair armed with nothing but a dead queen's confessions and a mother's desperate love. She had Seraphine's eyes, yes, but she had something else too, something that reminded him of himself in those distant days before the curse, before the centuries of solitude had worn away everything soft. She had courage. There is a ritual, he heard himself say, ancient, almost forgotten. It was used in the old days to awaken dormant bloodlines, to bring forth the vampire nature in those who carried it, but could not access it on their own. Elena's breath caught. You'll help me? I will do more than that. Valdric released her hand and turned toward the door that led to the manor's depths. I will teach you what it means to be of my blood. I will give you the tools you need to face Marcus on equal footing. And when the time comes... He paused at the threshold, looking back at her over his shoulder. In the firelight, his pale features seemed carved from ivory and shadow, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. When the time comes, we will confront him together, father and heir, king and princess, and the truth that Alara died to protect will finally be spoken aloud. Elena followed him into the darkness of the manor's lower levels, where stairs carved from living rock descended into the earth. The walls here were older than the house above, remnants of a fortress that had stood on this mountain since before the Romans came. Torches flickered to life as they passed, responding to Valdric's presence, illuminating frescoes of battles and coronations, of lovers entwined and enemies vanquished. This is where it began, Valdric said, his voice echoing off the stone. 600 years ago, a dying king brought me to this place. He had been cursed by a witch whose daughter he had wronged, condemned to eternal hunger as punishment for his cruelty. But the curse was too strong for him. His body was failing, his mind shattering under the weight of centuries he had never been meant to bear. They emerged into a vast chamber lit by a shaft of moonlight that fell through an opening far above. In the center of the chamber stood an altar of black stone, its surface covered in sigils that seemed to writhe and shift in the silver light. He gave me his blood on this altar, Valdric continued. He passed the curse to me, believing I was strong enough to carry it where he had failed. And I have carried it ever since, through wars and plagues, through the rise and fall of nations, through loves lost and betrayals weathered. He turned to face Elena, his expression solemn. The ritual requires blood freely given, my blood, to awaken what sleeps in your veins. Your blood, to bind us as family in a way that transcends mere genealogy. He paused, studying her face in the moonlight. It will be painful. The transformation always is. Your body will fight against what it is becoming, and there will be moments when you wish for death rather than continuation. I've been dying for 3 years, Elena replied quietly. Pain I can handle. It's the helplessness I can't bear. Valdric nodded slowly. Then we begin. He drew a blade from within his coat, a dagger of ancient design, its edge still sharp after centuries. Elena watched as he drew the blade across his palm, dark blood welling from the wound and dripping onto the altar. Drink, he said, offering her his hand. She hesitated only a moment. Then she raised his palm to her lips and drank. The blood was cold, thick, tasting of copper and something else, something ancient and alien, like starlight given liquid form. Elena felt it slide down her throat, settle in her stomach, begin to spread through her body in tendrils of ice and fire. Her heart stuttered, skipped, began to beat in a new rhythm that seemed to echo off the chamber walls. Now yours, Valdric said, taking the dagger and pressing it gently against her palm. Elena winced as the blade bit into her flesh. Her blood, when it fell upon the altar, was bright crimson. But as it mixed with Valdric's darkness, it began to change. Swirling patterns formed in the mingled blood, sigils that matched the ones carved into the stone, pulsing with a light that seemed to come from within. The pain hit her then, exactly as Valdric had warned. It felt as though every cell in her body was being torn apart and rebuilt, as though her very DNA was unraveling and reweaving itself into a new pattern. She cried out, falling to her knees, and Valdric caught her before she could collapse entirely. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice cutting through the agony. "Focus on my voice. The pain is temporary. The change is permanent. You are becoming what you were always meant to be." Elena forced her eyes open, forced herself to meet his gaze. In his storm-gray eyes, she saw something she had not expected to see. Hope. The pain crested like a wave, peaked, and began, slowly, gradually, to recede. Elena became aware of new sensations flooding her body. The beating of hearts in the village miles below, the rustle of mice in the manor's walls, the ancient whisper of the mountain itself, dreaming in its bed of stone. "It is done," Valdric said quietly. "You are Ashenvale now, truly and completely." Elena rose to her feet, marveling at the strength that now flowed through her limbs. The wasting sickness was gone. She could feel its absence like a splinter finally removed, leaving behind only clean, healed flesh. In its place was something else: power, hunger, the endless potential of immortality stretching out before her like a road with no horizon. "How do you feel?" Valdric asked. "Like I've been asleep my whole life," Elena breathed, "and only just woken up." A smile crossed Valdric's ancient face, the first genuine smile in longer than he could remember. "Then you were ready," he said, "ready to reclaim what was stolen from your bloodline, ready to face Marcus and demand an accounting for his crimes. When do we go?" "Now." Valdric's expression hardened into something cold and purposeful. "He knows you came here. He must have followed you from the village. He will be waiting for us, expecting to find you weakened by the sickness, easy prey for his cruelty." He took her hand, and together they walked back toward the stairs that led to the world above. He will find something very different instead. The confrontation came at dawn. Marcus had chosen the old churchyard for their meeting, a field of weathered gravestones on the eastern edge of the village, where morning mist rose from the earth like the breath of the dead. He stood among the monuments of a dozen generations, his dark hair stirred by a wind that did not touch the fog, his eyes fixed on the path where his father and the woman he had come to kill would soon appear. He had not expected the woman to survive the night. His poison, subtle, slow, woven into the very air she breathed, should have completed its work hours ago. Yet, he could feel her now, could sense the immortal blood singing in her veins like a chord struck on an instrument he had thought forever silenced. The old man had done it then, had awakened the dormant heritage that Marcus had spent 2 centuries trying to extinguish. No matter. He had killed Ashenvales before. He would kill them again. Valdric and Elena emerged from the mist like figures from a half-remembered dream. The vampire king looked exactly as Marcus remembered him, pale, proud, untouched by time, but there was something different in his bearing now. A purpose that had been absent for decades, a fire that had been cold. The woman at his side was the source of that fire. She walked without fear, her newly immortal senses drinking in every detail of the churchyard. Her eyes, those damnable eyes, Seraphine's eyes, fixed on Marcus with an accusation that needed no words. "Father," Marcus said, inclining his head in greeting. "It has been too long." "Not nearly long enough," Valdric replied coldly. "Though I suppose I should stop calling you that. You were never my son." Marcus's expression flickered, surprise, perhaps, or something darker. "You know then? She told you." He glanced at Elena with contempt. "I should have killed her in the cradle, like I did the others. But sentiment stayed my hand, the last of the true Ashenvale line, I thought. Perhaps I could use her, bend her to my purposes." "As Alara used you?" Valdric's voice was soft, dangerous. "As she raised a changeling in the place of her true child, hoping to control the throne through a puppet who would never question his origins?" "I questioned." Marcus's composure cracked slightly, revealing something raw underneath. "I always questioned why I felt nothing for you, why this world seemed so strange to me, so alien, why the blood in my veins whispered of places I had never seen, of a mother I could not remember." He stepped forward, and the mist swirled around him like a living thing. "I found the journal years ago, found Alara's confession, her plans, her betrayals. I could have exposed her then, could have told you the truth and thrown myself on your mercy." His lips twisted in a bitter smile. "But why would I? She gave me power, Father. She gave me a kingdom. All I had to do in return was make sure no true heir ever rose to challenge my claim." "So you hunted them," Elena said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was steady, but her hands had curled into fists at her sides. "My ancestors, my family. You murdered them one by one, calling it accidents and illnesses, making sure the bloodline never grew strong enough to threaten you." "Survival," Marcus replied. "The first law of any predator. I did what I had to do to protect what was mine. It was never yours." Valdrick's voice rang across the churchyard like the toll of a funeral bell. "The throne, the power, the name, they belong to the blood of Ashenvale, true Ashenvale, the bloodline that flows through this woman, through her son, through all the descendants that Seraphine left behind." Marcus's eyes blazed with cold fury. "Then I will end that bloodline tonight, here, where your precious humans bury their dead. It seems fitting, don't you think?" He moved then, faster than mortal eyes could follow, but Valdrick was there to meet him, ancient strength clashing with Fey-touch fury in a collision that shook the earth beneath their feet. Gravestones cracked, the mist scattered. For a moment, father and false son grappled in the gray light of dawn, two predators fighting for dominance. But Marcus was younger, stronger, fed by the wild magic of his true ancestry. He broke Valdrick's grip and sent the vampire king sprawling among the graves, triumph gleaming in his alien eyes. "You've grown weak, old man. Too many centuries of brooding in your empty manor. Too many years of grieving for mortals who never deserved your tears." He turned toward Elena, his hand rising to deliver the killing blow. "Now watch as I destroy the last of your—" Elena moved. She had been told that new vampires were clumsy, overwhelmed by their enhanced senses, slow to adapt to their newfound strength. But Elena had spent years fighting her illness, years learning to push through pain and exhaustion, years refusing to surrender to a body that wanted to betray her. She did not hesitate. Her hand closed around Marcus's throat, and she lifted him off his feet with strength she had not known she possessed. "You killed my grandmother," she said, her voice eerily calm. "You killed my mother. You tried to kill me, and you would have killed my son if we hadn't stopped you." Marcus clawed at her grip, but his fingers passed through her flesh without effect. She was of his kind now, immune to the petty tricks of a changeling masquerading as a vampire. "But you forgot something," Elena continued, squeezing tighter. "You forgot that Seraphine was more than just a carrier of Valdrick's blood. She was his daughter, and I am hers." She looked to Valdrick, who had risen from the graves, his expression a mixture of pride and sorrow. "The ritual," she said. "The one you mentioned, the one that can undo what Alara did." Valdrick nodded slowly. "It requires blood freely given. His blood, returned to the source that spawned him." "Then let's finish this." Together, they dragged Marcus to the center of the churchyard, to the oldest grave, a simple stone marking the resting place of the village's first priest, who had consecrated this ground 1,000 years ago. Valdrick drew the ancient dagger again, and this time, when he cut, it was Marcus who bled. The blood that fell upon the consecrated earth was not red. It was silver, shimmering, alive with an inner light that seemed to struggle against the coming dawn. As it soaked into the soil, Marcus began to change. His stolen form wavered, flickered, dissolved. For a moment, something else looked out from behind his eyes, something ancient and wild and terribly, terribly lost. Then it was gone, and Marcus with it. Where the false son of Ashenvale had stood, only a silver stain remained, slowly fading as the first rays of true sunlight broke across the churchyard. Elena let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "Is it over?" Valdrick took her hand, not as a king takes a subject's, but as a father takes a daughter's. "The thread is ended, but the story—" He looked at her with eyes that held 600 years of loneliness, and perhaps the first stirring of something new. "The story is only beginning." Epilogue. The manor house no longer felt empty. Elena had brought her son, Michael, to live in the rooms that had stood vacant for so long. The boy had his mother's eyes, his great-great-great-great-grandmother's eyes, and a curiosity that reminded Valdrick painfully, wonderfully, of Seraphine in her youth. He would grow old, this child. He would live a mortal life, make mortal choices, no mortal joys and sorrows. But he would know the truth of his heritage. He would know that somewhere in his blood, eternity waited. And when the time came, if the time came, the choice would be his to make. Elena found Valdric in the study one evening, surrounded by his books, watching the sunset paint the valley gold and crimson. "You're brooding again," she observed, settling into the chair across from his. "I was thinking about Alara," he admitted, "about why she did what she did, about whether, in her own twisted way, she thought she was protecting something. Does it matter?" Valdric considered the question. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. "Perhaps not. The dead keep their secrets, and the living must make their own meaning from what remains." He turned to look at her, this woman who had walked into his home seeking salvation and had found something far more complicated. "But I find myself grateful in a way I did not expect, grateful that her lies, her betrayals, her cruelties, that they led somehow to this." "To what?" "To not being alone anymore." Elena smiled, and in her smile, Valdric saw the echo of every Ashenvale who had come before, the daughter he had lost, the grandchildren he had never known, the generations who had lived and loved and died in the shadow of a truth they could not see. "You were never alone," she said softly. "We were always here. We just hadn't found our way home yet." The fire crackled in the hearth. The books waited on their shelves. Outside, Michael's laughter rang across the grounds as he chased fireflies through the gathering dusk. And in the great manor on the mountain, where centuries of solitude had finally given way to something new, the vampire king of Ashenvale sat in the company of his heir and watched the night unfold. Some stories end with death, some end with darkness. This one ended with light, and it would echo through eternity.